Hello Horus Heresy fans, welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, I am going to be talking through my tier list for the legions in the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness. Don't turn the video off yet. Before I do that, I'm going to explain to you why I think that doing a tier list like this is a fine thing to do. I think it's a good tool and is not the evil that people maybe think it is going to be. So why do a tier list? Well, the question of how good a legion is comes up a lot. And however you play the game, when you look at Facebook groups and other things online, you see the discussion, it mostly revolves around what's good and what's not good. And that doesn't mean that everybody who is having those discussions necessarily intends to make a spammy win at all costs army with the best legion they can find. People just like having the discussion. It doesn't need to be a taboo topic. It can be quite fun. Everybody ranks things differently anyway, so people's personal tier lists are obviously going to vary. This one's going to vary from yours, probably. But one of the things I think is a bit less good for the community is when people who are maybe new players, a lot of watchers on my channel have told me that they're new to the Horus Heresy or new to Games Workshop as a whole, maybe go online and have a look for things like tier lists, because they exist in lots of other games as well. So people who come from things like League of Legends or World of Warcraft or whatever will be used to looking at tier lists. When they go online, they're going to find tier lists that other people have made. And in my opinion, the tier lists that I've seen so far on YouTube have not been very good. They've not been very well researched, and they've maybe been done by people without too much knowledge of the game, and they can give a bad impression of the game. They can give a bad impression of some legions. Maybe people will look at those legions and think, well, I'm not going to play that even though I really like it because someone said it's going to suck and it's not going to win games. I just think that having at least one good high quality tier list out there, if I can be so bold as to say that my tier list is going to be high quality, whether you agree or not's a different matter, and discouraging new players from finding that misinformation in some badly informed tier lists is better than me not doing a tier list at all. So I'm going to do it. Whether you like this video or not, it's up to you, but I think it's a useful thing to have out there, and hopefully, if it's, good, I think that the final list also paints quite a good picture of the game as well. So, let's move on to the tier list with all that said, and let's start talking through the different legions and where I think they sit. So, we're going to start with the first legion, the Dark Angels. Well, I think that the Dark Angels are very good, and I think they are probably a little bit better than most of the other legions right now, certainly in a world where it's just Space Marines fighting Space Marines, and this is mainly due to the sheer amount of template plasma weapons that they get access to. Now, plasma weapons are really, really good still generally, and plasma weapons that are also templates that have really got the potential to kill lots and lots of Space Marines or Terminators or wherever all at once is quite a big deal. But that's not the only thing they do. On top of that, they've also got a really good Primarch. They've also got what I consider to likely be the best elite Terminator choice in the Knight Cenobium. I think are probably the best Terminators in the game, as well as having more right to war than anybody else. They've got tons of access to different ways to play their army, which is not only cool, but also very powerful and flexible, as well as having some really great Legion rules that really let them tailor what they're doing, to what's in the army. You can make sure your Legion rules are always going to be relevant, and they've got good special characters too. So everything they've got is really good. There's nothing that they have that isn't great, and for that reason, I put them in a cut above tier, because I think they're just a little bit better than everyone else. Now, that doesn't mean that if you play against Dark Angels with another Legion, you're just going to lose because they're just better. I do think that there will be a lot of feel-bad moments playing against Dark Angels, because if you rock up with your, tons of tactical Marines, your really cool army, they are going to be able to take them off the board really, really easily. And I think the sort of spammy template plasma thing that Dark Angels have got going on is probably the thing that verges on, closest to competitive silliness that I've seen in the Horus Heresy rule set. I think that they are a little bit problematic. It would have probably been great if they didn't have piles and piles of template plasma flamers, but there you go. So I think these are a little bit better than most other things. Next, we've got the Emperor's Children. So I think these go in my balanced tier. I think Emperor's Children are great. I've done a review on these in another video already. I think they are really interesting the way they work in melee. They're really interesting in that their specialty is going first rather than necessarily hitting harder, and also being hard to hit themselves. They've got access to some great equipment in the form of their sonic stuff as well, and they've also got interesting but not crazy unique units, and Fulgrim's probably #1 Primarch for fighting other Primarchs as well. So I think all that considered, they're really good. They don't have anything that's crazy overpowered. They don't have anything that makes them particularly good at shooting either. So, you can shoot lots at them. I think they're quite nicely balanced, and they do some really interesting stuff. Next, we got Iron Warriors. Iron Warriors they have a really, really powerful, potentially Legion trait, which gives them, +1 strength when they're shooting things like vehicles and dreadnoughts. Now, that is really, really crazily good. Strength 10 las cannons or strength 8 rend and auto cannons and all that kind of thing mean that they can take off somebody else's big toys quicker and more easily than basically anybody else in the game. But on the flip side, that bonus does absolutely nothing if your opponent's brought a whole lot of tactical marines and a bunch of apothecaries and it's just going to fight you like that. Their Iron Tyrants are also really good. Being able to concentrate firepower in one unit like that makes them really good at returning fire. They all come with power fists, so they're not that easy to charge either, because they're also going to overwatch you with a lot of missile launchers, and they're actually really cheap for what they bring, so I really like them. I think Perturabo's kind of like a middle-and Primarch. He's certainly on the sort of middle to weaker end of the spectrum, but overall I think the package of what Iron Warriors get has the potential to be very powerful, but it can also vary and sometimes not do an awful lot for you as well. And I think overall they're nicely balanced. That balances itself out quite well. Next, we got the White Scars. So I think I struggled a little bit trying to really decide where White Scars go, and when you look at what they do, they've got a lot of the things that make an army really fun to play. So they're all about movement tricks, going first, seizing the initiative, that kind of stuff, which is generally really good in a game and also is a lot of fun as well. I think the thing is that a lot of games of Horus Heresy, might not always come down to who's best at the objective. A lot of the time it might be best at who's killing the other person, and in that regard they don't necessarily have a lot, but they do have some really powerful rules in the Karash, which goes on the Golden Keshigs, on the Ebon Keshigs, sorry, and also they can put on some of the other units with Right to War. So whilst they might not be quite as ideal at making like a pure biker force or a super fast force as they once were, because they don't actually buff those units a lot. As it turns out, I think it would have been probably cool if they had some buffs to those units rather than just a buff to, going first in general movement. They do have, a slightly different game than a lot of other legions. They play a little bit different. Now, I was considering maybe whether they should go in this a little bit weaker tier, but I think on balance of things, I don't think they're that far behind other legions. I do think they're maybe a little bit on the weaker side, but if you can leverage all those movement bonuses and everything else that they've got, they easily just come straight back up. So I think they're also in the balanced tier, although maybe just a little bit on the lower end of it, particularly when they have to fight against some of the legions with very strong combat bonuses. Next, we got the Space Wolves. Space Wolves do what they do and do it very well. They're faster at getting up the table. They can run and still do stuff, which is really good. They've got lots of abilities to make them better in combat. They've got powerful equipment options that do really bolster their abilities in combat. Their unique units are very good. Their unique Terminators are very good. Lehman Russ is a really strong combat Primarch, one of the top ones as well. And really they're pretty good at all that, but obviously they're not as good at shooting. They don't have any buffs in shooting, and being too focused on melee can give you a really hard game sometimes against someone who's brought a lot of shooting as well. So, and they don't have anything other than being focused on melee. They are fast though to get there. I think Space Wolves are really good. I think they play to their theme well. I think the army is strong when built, as obviously the rules help you build it, and at the same time I don't think they're too crazy or anything like that. So I think they come out nicely as balanced for they sit in that tier. Imperial Fists next. So I think Imperial Fists have a pretty weak Legion trait, and Imperial Fist's real special rules, their real Legion trait is actually their special rules. So being able to deep strike all across the board in lots of different ways, being able to take those 3+ invulnerable save storm shields on just any unit of Terminators that you want, and also having access to those incredibly hard to kill Phalanx models when they can reroll their invulnerable saves in one of the Rites of War, gives them real great flexibility and ways to play when you combine it with the fact they can also get heavy support squads that count as line, and the fact that, their bolters are a bit better, they are a little bit better at shooting, and that also works really well on the tanks and stuff as well. Some of the bigger tanks like the Fellblade, their weapons are auto cannon weapons, so the Imperial Fist buff works on that as well. So I think they have a really good balanced play style. They're good at making Terminators better, and Terminators are just a fantastic unit in the game as well. And I think that makes them nice and balanced. None of the stuff they do is over the top, but they certainly buff all of their units, and they can make some really interesting and good lists out of it. Next is Night Lords. So I have reviewed the Night Lords already, and I think Night Lords have got the potential to be very, very powerful. I think that their abilities all line up perfectly with fear. They've been designed really well to make use of their fear. Pinning is one of the more powerful things in the game, but most Legions don't have a particular way to get pinning checks through better, whereas Night Lords do. I also think Conrad Kurtz is one of the top Primarchs for me because of his mass pinning abilities that he's got as well. And all of their special units play really well with their theme too. They've got access to infiltrate easily and jump units as well, which is also just a great thing generally to use in the game. Generally tends to be quite powerful, being able to move your stuff around like that, especially when you've got a lot of pinning to keep them safe and a lot of offensive ability to make use of that movement as well. I think Night Lords for me verge on being into the cut above tier, but because they don't particularly do anything special against vehicles, and they're not particularly great at using their abilities for things that aren't infantry, so all these vehicles and dreadnoughts that are fearless, they're not always going to get the full benefits out of what they do. And whilst I think they are very strong, I don't think that they are so strong that it just makes them absolutely better than everyone else. I'm just going to move White Scars down to the end of that list there. So Blood Angels next. Blood Angels again, lots of mobility, very good Legion trait, absolutely fantastic weapons in the Perdition weapons as well, which is very powerful add-on for their units. A couple of really good elite units. The Angels tiers aren't so great, but the Paladins are very good in combat. Sanguinus is a really strong combat Primarch as well, which is good. They're just generally good. Again, much like Space Wolves, all of the things that they get plays to their theme. The way you build their armies, their bonuses really work with that, and it makes them quite powerful at that. And on the flip side as well, they're all a combat army. They don't do anything for shooting, and therefore, they're quite balanced in that regard, and they can, struggle a bit more against a shooting army. I do think they're very powerful. I do think they've got a lot of deep strike options, a lot of movement abilities, combined with how good they are in melee, as a real chance of making them one of the sort of higher end Legions, I think. But I don't think they're so different that I would put them in a different tier to the rest of the Legions. So I would put these up at the sort of top end of this with Night Lords, but still in this balanced tier for me. Iron Hands next. Iron Hands, rarely as Legions go, got a little bit gypped on the amount of stuff that's in the book. Much like Salamanders that we'll talk about later, they just don't have a lot of stuff. They haven't got many elite units dedicated to them. They've got no special characters outside of Ferrus Manus, and they really suffer from that. Also, it doesn't help that the elite units that they did get are certainly not as flashy or exciting as some of the elite units that the other Legions got as well. All that said, I think their Legion trait is fabulous. -1 strength for shooting across particularly dreadnoughts, but also infantry is just really, really good. Their Graviton Shredders with 2-shot Haywire really, really helps them and is also really powerful as well. So I think that the amount of things you're going to be able to do with Iron Hands is a little bit limited, so they may be a bit less exciting to play than some of the other legions, like Imperial Fists, where they can do all sorts of different things, and you can put the army in loads of different configurations to make it interesting. Iron Hands are going to have to play with a more sort of limited set of stuff that plays to their strengths if they want to be good, but those things are there. Those things that they can do are there. They are a really good legion, despite the fact they've not quite got as many toys as everybody else. And for that reason, they also just go into tier 2. They just go into that balanced tier in the middle with everybody else. They're not so far different from them. World Eaters next. Now, World Eaters are sort of like Space Wolves in a lot of ways. They're very focused on what they do, which is get into melee and be good at melee. What I do like about World Eaters is they have great access to feel no pain, whereas Space Wolves are maybe a bit faster. World Eaters are a little bit more resilient, so they have great access to feel no pain. They have great access to great melee weapons as well. Their unique units, particularly Red Butchers, I think, rarely do what you want them to do well, like their Berserkers. They're hard to kill, they hit really hard, they got lots of attacks, they're good at killing elites and chopping their way through lots of Space Marines as well. World Eaters do something very simple, and they do it really well. They don't do it so well that it means that when they fight another Legion in combat who's also good at it, that they're just going to win. And again, that means that I think these go in balanced. Maybe they go in the sort of... I'm just going to rearrange this a little bit to broadly... this middle of the pack is a little bit of the middle. They're all roughly around the same area, whereas I think, there's a couple here that could maybe push up a little bit. They're close to it, and you've got your White Scars, which maybe should drop down. I don't think World Eaters are at the top of that. I think the fact that Blood Angels, get some extra movement, they've got a lot of jump packs and stuff, makes them, a little bit better. But again, not so far different that if these two armies met on the battlefield, you would assume one of them was going to win because they're just so different in power level. Ultramarines, the poster boys. Ultramarines get a bonus to shooting. They get +1 to hit with shooting as long as your units are kind of nearby. That's always going to be good. That's always going to be a good thing. They also get really good elite units as well. So the Suzerain are just good. They have very good weapons, very well tailored for, AP2 without going at a slower initiative is a powerful thing to have access to. They've got a middling Primarch as well, but really, they're a shooting army. They're a shooting army with some flexibility and with some good elite units as well. Nothing too special. Also, exactly the kind of thing that you can play and do well at games with. And again, very simply, I think that puts Ultramarines squarely in this balanced tier. Death Guard. Now, this was the Legion that I agonized over the most. So their Legion trait is a little bit on the weak side, but maybe worse than that for people trying to pick an army. It's also a bit on the boring side, I think. So it's better than people give it credit for, being able to ignore terrain modifiers moving difficult terrain. And it is a nice thing, particularly with how good heavy support squads are, being able to put them in vehicles and move them around and not have to snapshot when you get out. That is also good. But it's just not, a lot of the time that bonus just won't do anything at all for a lot of units. If your unit's already in cover taking some shots, it's not going to do anything. If your unit's a tank or a unit walking around in the open on its way to an objective, it does nothing. It just does nothing a lot of the time. On top of that as well, Mortarian's not incredible. He's kind of middle of the road. And Death Shroud Terminators, while they are good, I would put them in the sort of higher end of elite Terminators, are the only one of their special units that you really want to use. They are quite cool because they can't be instant death. They're a little bit harder to get rid of than most Terminators, really, because they're immune. Well, they're mostly immune to instant death. Very few things have got strength 10 to try to instant death them, which does make Death Shroud quite good. But the weapons that Death Guard get as well, so they get these poisoned projectors of various kinds, and they wound easily, but they don't penetrate armor. And when you look at them compared to what Dark Angels get, for example, for effectively the same value, they're just massively inferior. And I think that Death Guard, for me, just verge on this bit weaker tier because their bonuses and their stuff just generally just doesn't do stuff all the time. When it works, it's fine. It does do some things, but a lot of the time it just doesn't do anything at all. And for that reason, I think that Death Guard are just in this. Now, they are not so far away that I would disagree if someone put them at the end of this tier at all. They're not that far away, but I just think that the lack of abilities and, you know, the weakness generally in their stuff just pushes them a little bit down. And I do think that their Legion trait could stand to be a bit better, and I do think that those alchemical weapons could also stand to be a bit more interesting as well. Next, we've got the Thousand Suns. So I'm looking forward to doing a video on Thousand Suns because I see a lot of people discussing them in the community and being like not really sure whether they're absolutely incredible or really bad. And that to me actually just tells you that they're balanced when people can't really agree. They work very differently to other legions, so they want lots of infantry. They've got lots of things to sort of do and combo and stack together to get the value out of those psychic powers they've got. But they are good. Psychic powers are just really good in this edition, so being able to get lots of Psychers for cheap is good. Being able to have a Psyker Dreadnought is good. Sekhmet Terminators are also really good. Guard of the Crimson King giving you Deep Strike and Fear on top of that is really good. Lots of the stuff they've got is good, and when you start using all the powers together, I think when people start seeing the powers on the table, like the ability to snipe out a model or the ability for, you know, units to move an extra 3 inches, you'll see how much all these little bonuses stack up to make them much better than they maybe look. So Thousand Suns for me are really well balanced. There's lots of different things they can do, loads of different ways to build your army, and loads of ways to utilise their strengths as well. So next we've got the Sons of Horus, which is a super, super popular army. I really like the Sons of Horus bonus. I think -1 strength in combat is very powerful for the same reason the Iron Hands one is powerful against shooting. But they also have some, you know, really good unique units. Their unique units are good. Justarian Terminators are maybe not. I get the impression that they were the best last edition, and I don't think they are the best, but they're certainly up there. They're just very solid all around. Horus is very powerful Primarch. He's the only Primarch you can pay 1,000 points for, but even just in his normal form, he's one of the better Primarchs as well. What I like most about the Sons of Horus is that they're good in melee, but also they've got some stuff that affects shooting too, and they're nice. It's much like Imperial Fists. They're a great way to make a balanced force that's also really good on the tabletop as well. And they can be good at a bit of everything. And they aren't overwhelming in the stuff that they get. Like, none of it's super powerful. Like, Bane Strike Bolters are good, but they pay points for them, so they're okay. And for that reason, I think these just go imbalanced as well. And you can see now, as I move them into balance, maybe what I was talking about at the start of the episode when I said, actually, if you do a tier list and you don't overly hard to separate things, and you really think about whether there really is a big difference between a lot of these legions, you can see how it's starting to emerge now. Word Bearers. Now, a lot of Word Bearer players I know are really unhappy with their Legion trait, and I'm not going to disagree. It's certainly not the most exciting Legion trait in the world, but it is better than people are giving it credit for. So the ability to just effectively not run away in combat, or maybe just not get pinned sometimes, depending on what's going on, is pretty good. Now, I think it probably could have been a 7 default instead of a 6. I think a 6 is just a little bit too low. Sometimes, maybe too often, it won't do anything. But it is quite a decent ability. But where these are really strong is just in the raw stats of Gal Vorbach, the Marigal Dreadnought. The raw stats are just absolutely fabulous. They're very, very powerful. Yes, they die to people with psychic weapons, but they're not going to be tons of them on every battlefield, and you will be able to avoid them. I think that's cool. Also, the access to easy psychers is good, and they're obviously going to get better when we get Ruinstorm Demons as well. Now, I would quite happily play Word Bearers right now. I don't think they're really bad, as a lot of people seem to think they are, or maybe people are disappointed in how they've changed since the last edition. But their stuff is just super powerful. And for that reason, I think they are also pretty balanced, even if it does sort of mean you have to lean on those demon units to really get the value out of them. I would certainly play these if the lore was my style. Salamanders next. Now, I think Salamanders have got the worst end of the stick in the books for sure. So their Legion trait is good, but is very limited. So although -1 to wound is better than the -1 strength on the Iron Hands, Legion ability, being limited to flame, plasma, and Volkite weapons really hurts it. So, you get shot by bolters, this isn't making a difference. You get shot by las cannons, this isn't making a difference. It's only making a difference to a narrow subset of weapons. And whilst against some people, that will mean that a lot of their heavy weapons will be at -1 to wound, also a lot of the time, this genuinely is going to do nothing. If people have brought auto cannons or if people have brought las cannons, it's kind of a null trait. They also didn't do too well with Vulcan. Vulcan's not incredible. Also, the Pyroclast did get buffed, I believe, from last edition, but ultimately they're guys with a melter gun and a flamer. Slightly buffed melter gun and flamer. Artificer armor is cool. I would love to use that unit if I had a 30k Salamanders army. I think they're great, but when you compare it to the special units other people get, maybe not that incredible. Likewise, the Terminators as well. Whilst the Fire Drakes are very powerful, having access to that 3+ save, as well as being able to give them all Thunder Hammers, is a super great thing to be able to do. You can basically do the same thing with Imperial Fist, except they can deep strike theirs, and they've got lots of other buffs in the army as well at the same time. So I think that Salamanders really have only got one thing going for them, which is just the Fire Drakes, and everything else is kind of a little bit meh. They also, similar to the Iron Hands, have really suffered from all their special characters like vanishing into nowhere, so their section of the book feels a bit light, and hopefully that will come back later and, give them a little bit more stuff to play with. So they are a bit of a one-trick pony for now. Fortunately, it's a cool one-trick pony. It's a bunch of Fire Drake Terminators, which I think everyone thinks is awesome, but they don't really get a lot of places to go for that, and I think they probably are, well, they certainly are in the bit weaker tier, probably at the bottom. Now, again, I would stress that this does not mean that if you play Salamanders, you're going to lose to Dark Angels every time you play them. And certainly not to the units that are in the balanced tier either. The difference between these is not so great that you're going to lose every game. And that's because ultimately everything's got the same base units. So whilst these buffs do change things, change the way the army plays, change the units, it's not so massive that it's going to ruin the game. And I think that's very important to bear in mind when looking at a tier list, is how big the gap is between the tiers, and I don't think it's that big. Raven Guard next. So Raven Guard, I think, look really great in this edition. I think that access to lots of infiltrate, as anyone who's played a version of these Warhammer rules with infiltrating, is really good. But also as well, I think that they did really well with the special weapon with their claw. So it's one of the better stat lines on a special weapon. So it's got AP3, but it's got Ren 5 as well. So it means it can work against any target. They've got a special unit with jump packs and also using a pair of those claws, which gives you +2 attacks as well, which is just super good. They've got their Mordathan snipers, which are, recon squad snipers are really good, and they're BS5 versions with a special rule on top as well, which is also really good. And I just think all of the stuff combines to give them great movement abilities or great, buffs in combat, depending on which sort of mini faction you fall into, but also as well good offensive power and defensive power with their abilities to get shrouded too. I think they've got all the things that you really want in an army in this edition of the game. For that reason, I think they go into the cut above tier. I think they are just a little tiny bit above the Night Lords and the Blood Angels. That just pushes them a little bit up. Finally, we've got Alpha Legion, or we've not got Alpha Legion, depending on your take on that. So Alpha Legion are interesting because they can use other people's units, and therefore, in some ways, if any unit is in a high tier, Alpha Legion have got to go in the high tier as well. But I think that Alpha Legion don't quite get the buffs that the Raven Guard or the Dark Angels do. So I do like their Legion trait, and I do think people underestimate it, particularly the fact that it adds 2 inches to every charge roll. And it also adds 2-inch to things like rapid fire range, which can really change when people are doing stuff to you. But I like their advanced reaction most of all. I think their advanced reaction is fabulous, but I don't think that their Legion rules are phenomenal. They do get Lernian Terminators, which are one of my top Terminator units, because even though they're not particularly anything special in terms of equipment or special rules, they are line. And for you to get line Terminators without having to take any kind of Rite of War or anything else is really, really good. You know, being able to just plonk them around on objectives and do stuff with them is good. They also get great special characters that can really mess with what your opponents do, and they get the Saboteur as well. I think they get loads of great options and the ability to pick and choose from other people's Legion options as well, which I think makes them pretty powerful, really. So for that reason, I think Alpha Legion just go into this cut above tier, because they got lots of things that all come together to really make them good. And ultimately, if Dark Angels are up here because of Interemptors or Knights Cenobium, and Raven Guard are up here because of the Dark Talons, you know, Alpha Legion can take some of those if they want to take those best units. They can also pick and choose from some of the other best units, like Fire Drake Terminators, for example, might be a thing that they want to take, or they can take, you know, some Phoenix Terminators from Emperor's Children if they just want something that never dies in melee. There's just so many things you can do with them, even though their rules aren't quite as good. So I would put them in this cut above tier. I think they're just in there. Again, do I think they are a million miles off the sort of high to medium end of the balanced tier? Absolutely not. Really depends on what units they're taking, and their Legion rule isn't that amazing. So there you go. There is what I consider to be the tier list for Horus Heresy Age of Darkness at this point today. I think it paints a really good picture of the game, because, I mean, you know, if you look at it, that's 13 Legions all in the balanced tier in the middle, all quite similar to each other, who are all going to have great games against each other and be on a similar level, even though they all do very different things. We've got 3 Legions that are maybe just a little bit better than that. Again, I don't think that the difference between the cut above tier and the balanced tier is huge. And that's really important when looking at a tier list, because sometimes people consider the gulf between 2 tiers to be big. Like, things in the tier underneath will never beat the things in the tier above, and that is not the case in this. I would say again, I think Dark Angels Plasma Flamer units are like super anti-fun and are, you know, really poorly balanced. But other than that, I think that these things are quite close together. And similarly on the bottom, I think Death Guard and Salamanders are a bit weaker and maybe a little bit less fun than the Legions in the balanced tier in the middle. But I don't think that if you play one of those Legions, or if you like and want to play one of those Legions, that you won't be able to beat the people in the tiers above you at all. I think that, you know, you will still have great games with them. I don't think you'll have any problems there. And hopefully, looking at this does paint a really good picture of Horus Heresy as a game in terms of balance and where everything sits relevant to each other. And I think, hopefully, if this stands the test of time, at least for a while, I think we've got a really good game to be looking forward to playing lots of games of. So that's the end of the episode. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed the content, please do like and subscribe to the channel. If you've got any thoughts on this episode, and I'm sure there will be many because of the nature of the episode, please do drop me a comment. I'll be happy to have a chat about it. I hope that you see that tier lists aren't necessarily evil, and hopefully this one will mean that, you know, some of the slightly weaker tier lists out there aren't giving out too much misinformation to people. So thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.